Scott's Geography Notebook.
Do you want to try saying it?
Da, da, da.
With air mass characteristics, there are a few things that we're going to be looking at and thinking about as we're looking at these different air masses. The first thing that we want to think a little bit about is the moisture in that air mass. Is the air mass going to be really moist? Is it going to be really, really dry? Is it going to be humid or is it going to be dry? And that really has to do with the amount of humidity that we have in that air parcel. The other thing that we want to understand as we're looking at our air parcel has to do with the temperature of the parcel. And that temperature of the air parcel is going to have a lot to do with the density. So let's get started. Let's explore some of these ideas. I've created a swell little chart to help us understand some of these guys. So the first thing that we're going to be looking at is going to be our moisture content. All right, when we're looking at the moisture, we want to think about this two different ways. One is going to be a fairly dry air parcel, and the other one is going to be a very moist air parcel. All right, where do we find those dry air parcels? Is going to be in continental areas, away from the ocean, away from those maritime, right? So we have continental, and yeah, if we are looking for moist air, then that's going to be found in our maritime environments. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to abbreviate each one of these. I'm going to do my moisture with a little c, and I'm going to do my moisture or my maritime influence with a little m. Okay. Now, let's take a little bit of a look at our temperature. We know that different latitudes will have different temperatures. If we go all the way up to the polar regions, then it's going to be very, very cold. If we're going to our equatorial regions, it's going to be very, very hot. So let's talk about just some general descriptions here. The first thing that we are going to talk about is going to be our equatorial. And those areas will be very hot. Okay? If we come outside of the equatorial, then we get to our tropics. And those tropics are going to be very warm. If we go even higher, then we start to get into our polar regions. And those are going to be very cool. And then we can get into our Arctic or Antarctic. And those are just going to be right down cold. All right. Now, for each one of these temperature regions, we're going to give a capital letter for each one of those. And so we can have our E for our equatorial areas. We can have a T for our tropical regions that are going to be warm. Okay. For our polar regions, we can do a capital P, and notice we did lowercase here. We're doing capitals along here. And then for our Arctic, we will do a capital A, or we can do an AA, and that's going to be for Arctic or Antarctic. Now, all we need to do is combine these guys. So we're going to always start about our moisture content, and then we're going to talk about our temperature. So we do have some areas where we might see a continental equatorial. That's going to be very, very dry and very, very hot. And that might be, for example, inland at the mid-latitudes, especially if we don't have those tropical storms. Okay. The other one that we can see here would be maritime equatorial. Not as often. The other two that are less common, that we don't look as much at, are going to be down here below, right? So we could have areas that are very dry and that are Arctic, right? And so that's going to be a CA air mass. Continental and moist, that'll be harder to find, but it'll be maritime Arctic air mass. Sometimes these guys aren't necessarily labeled with their humidity. Sometimes they're just going to be given Arctic or Antarctic. for either one of those, right? So it might not talk too much about the humidity. It's in those mid-latitudes, and it's kind of bouncing between the two of these guys that we really pay a lot of attention. The two that we really are going to be seeing are going to be those areas that are going to be dry and cool. Those dry and cool areas are going to be our continental polar air masses. And the other one that we're going to see are going to be the warm and humid, and that's going to be our maritime tropic. So out of all of these are the two to pay the most attention to, the continental polar and the maritime tropic. And the reason that we pay our most attention to those is because those are the two that we're going to be talking about as we move forward, as we start talking about frontal lifting and other things along those lines. Certainly, we can fill in the rest. We can have our continental tropic. Continental tropic might be what we see in central Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. Northern part of Mexico. We might be seeing that. We can also see maritime polar regions. Those maritime polar regions are going to be what we might see if we were looking off the coast of Alaska. It's still going to be relatively cold, but it's still going to have a lot of that moisture. Again, the two biggies that we pay the most attention to, although they all count, is going to be our continental polar and our maritime tropic.